It was supposed to be just another quiet night on the empty stretch of highway. The kind where the world feels still, where headlights cut through the darkness, and where nothing ever really happens until it does. No one could have predicted the events that were about to unfold. No one could have imagined that a stray dog, abandoned and left to fend for himself, would become the hero of the night. The footage you're about to see is nothing short of extraordinary. It captures a moment so raw, so intense, that will stay with you long after this video ends. A man trapped inside a burning car, his life slipping away with every passing second. And just when all hope seemed lost, just when it seemed like no one would come to his rescue, help arrived in the most unexpected form. It all began when Jake Carter, a 32-year-old mechanic, was driving home late from work. He was exhausted, his mind clouded with thoughts of the long day he had just endured. He barely noticed the storm brewing in the distance, the wind picking up, the eerie silence that sometimes lingers before something terrible happens. As he navigated the dark road, his car suddenly swerved. Maybe it was the slippery pavement, maybe it was just one of those freak moments of fate, but in an instant his vehicle spun out of control. The sound of screeching tires cut through the silence, followed by the deafening crash as the car slammed into a tree. Then fire. The front of the car crumpled like paper, the hood buckling under the impact. Sparks flickered, igniting a blaze that spread faster than anyone could react. Within moments, flames licked at the metal, smoke billowing into the cold night air. Jake was alive, but barely. Dazed, disoriented, and pinned by the wreckage, he struggled to move. His chest was heavy, his breath shallow, his vision blurring as heat closed in around him. He tried to cry out, but the thick smoke choked his voice. And that's when he appeared. Out of the darkness, through the howling wind and crackling fire, a lone figure emerged. Not a firefighter, not a passerby, but a dog. A stray, thin, ragged, with fur matted from the harshness of the streets. He had no name, no home, and no reason to stop. But something in him, something unexplainable, told him to run toward the danger instead of away from it. The footage, captured by a nearby security camera, shows what happened next. An act of courage that defies logic, that speaks to the deep connection between humans and animals in a way words never could. The dog, without hesitation, lunged toward the burning car, barking furiously, as if calling for help. He circled the vehicle, assessing, calculating, searching for a way in. And then, against all odds, he found one. With the fire raging, the dog darted toward the open passenger side window, leaping onto the crumpled door. He nudged, pulled, pawed desperately, sensing the urgency of the moment. Inside, Jake could barely make out the shape of the dog through the haze of smoke, but he could hear him, feel him, a lifeline in the darkness. He summoned the last bit of strength he had, reaching out, trying to grasp onto anything, on a hope. The minutes felt like hours. Every second mattered. The fire was spreading. The air was running out. But the dog refused to leave, refused to give up. And then, something incredible happened. But before we get to that, take a moment. Think about what you've just witnessed. A stray dog, with no reason to risk his own life, choosing to save a stranger. What drives an animal to act so selflessly? Was it instinct, fate, or was it something even deeper? A reminder that sometimes heroes come in the most unexpected forms? The fire crackled, the flames growing stronger with each passing second. Smoke curled into the night sky, thick and suffocating, wrapping around the crumpled car like a deadly embrace. Inside, Jake's breaths came in short, sharp gasps. His body was weak, his mind clouded with the growing lack of oxygen. He could barely keep his eyes open. Every muscle in his body screamed in pain, but one thing kept him from slipping away completely: the dog. Jake could hear him, the frantic scratching against metal, the urgent barks cutting through the roaring fire. He wanted to call out, to tell the dog to run, to save himself. But no words came. His body refused to move, his voice was lost, his vision blurred as the heat pressed in around him. The dog didn't leave. He didn't back down. He darted from one side of the car to the other, his body moving with a desperation that almost seemed human. He circled the wreckage, searching for another way in, his paws scraping against the pavement as he fought to reach Jake. And then, just when it seemed like time was running out, a faint sound in the distance, tires skidding, an engine roaring closer. Headlights flashed through the thick smoke. A car, slowing down, stopping. The dog turned toward the approaching vehicle, barking wildly, as if begging for help. His tail swished anxiously, his eyes locked on the car door as it swung open. A man stepped out, his face shadowed against the bright beams of his headlights. He froze for a second, his brain struggling to process the sight in front of him. The burning wreck, the lone dog, the chaos unfolding in real time. Then instinct kicked in. He ran toward the car, shielding his face from the heat. The dog darted toward him, barking, nudging him toward the driver's side. It was almost as if the dog knew exactly what needed to be done, as if he had been waiting for someone to arrive, someone with the strength to do what he couldn't. The man crouched low, peering through the shattered window. His stomach clenched at the sight inside. Jake was barely conscious, his head slumped forward, his arms limp at his sides. The flames were creeping closer, licking at the dashboard. "We need to get him out, now," the man muttered under his breath, reaching for the door handle. But it wouldn't budge. The impact had crushed the metal frame, locking it in place. The man braced himself, yanking at the door with all his strength. Nothing. The dog barked again, his paws scratching at the ground, as if urging the man to move faster. The urgency in his eyes, the sheer desperation in his body language. It was something beyond animal instinct. It was something deeper, something unexplainable. The man took a step back, his mind racing. He looked around, searching for anything, something to break the window, something to pry the door open. Then, his eyes landed on a large rock near the side of the road. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, his hands shaking as he lifted it over his head and slammed it against the window. The glass shattered, shards scattering onto Jake's motionless body. A rush of thick, black smoke poured out of the car, making the man cough as he reached inside. "Come on, buddy, stay with me," he muttered, grabbing Jake under his arms. He tugged, trying to pull him free, but Jake was wedged tight against the crumpled dashboard. The fire was growing. The heat was unbearable. And then, the dog. He jumped up onto the wreckage, his front paws resting against the edge of the broken window. He let out a sharp whimper, his eyes locked onto Jake. The man gritted his teeth, adjusting his grip. With a deep breath, he heaved one more time. And finally, Jake's body shifted. He dragged him out, the weight nearly knocking him off balance. He stumbled backward, pulling Jake onto the pavement, just as the flames surged through the interior of the car. The dog jumped down beside them, his tail wagging, his nose pressed against Jake's arm as if checking to see if he was still breathing. The man lowered Jake onto the ground, quickly pressing his fingers to his neck. A pulse weak, but there. He exhaled, glancing down at the dog. "You did good, boy. You did real good." But the dog wasn't done. He circled Jake, sniffing, nudging, his body language restless, uneasy. It was almost as if he was waiting for something, as if he knew this moment wasn't over. The man pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed emergency services. His voice was hurried, urgent, giving them their location, explaining the wreck, the fire, the unconscious man beside him. "Hang in there," he murmured, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Help's on the way." The dog sat beside them, his ears twitching at the sound of distant sirens growing louder. But his eyes never left Jake. There was something about the way he looked at him, something knowing, something deep. As the sirens wailed, as the red and blue lights flashed against the night sky, one question remained. Where had this dog come from? And why had he chosen this moment, this person, to save? The answer was still unknown. But one thing was certain, this stray wasn't just a dog. He was something more, and his story was just beginning. The flashing lights painted streaks of red and blue across the pavement as the ambulance and fire trucks pulled up. The night, once silent except for the crackling fire, was now filled with the sound of rushing footsteps, the hiss of water as firefighters worked to douse the flames, and the urgent voices of paramedics assessing Jake's condition. But through all the chaos, one figure remained still, watching, waiting. The dog. He sat close to Jake, his dark eyes darting from the paramedics to the wreckage and back again. His tail rested against the cold ground, his body tense. The firefighters barely noticed him at first, their focus on the burning vehicle. One of them moved to check the area, likely searching for any other potential victims. That's when he spotted the stray. "Where'd he come from?" the firefighter asked, glancing at the paramedics. The man who had pulled Jake out shook his head. "I don't know. He was already here when I arrived. He was trying to get him out." The firefighter raised an eyebrow, looking at the dog again. He had seen working dogs, trained rescue animals, but this was different. The paramedics hoisted Jake onto a stretcher, securing an oxygen mask over his face. His skin was covered in soot, his clothes torn from the impact. His breathing was shallow, but he was alive. They worked quickly, loading him into the ambulance as one of them turned to the man who had stopped to help. "Are you riding with him?" The man hesitated, glancing at the dog, who was now standing, his body stiff as if he understood that Jake was being taken away. He let out a quiet whimper, stepping closer to the ambulance. The firefighter crouched down, extending a hand toward the dog. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" The dog didn't move. His gaze stayed on Jake, ears twitching as the paramedics spoke in hushed voices. The firefighter sighed, standing up. "Somebody call animal control. Poor guy's probably lost." The moment those words were spoken, the dog's ears perked up. It was as if he understood exactly what was being said. He backed up a step, his muscles tensing. "No," the man who had helped Jake said suddenly. "Don't call them. I'll take him." The firefighter turned to him, surprised. "You sure? He might not be friendly." The man glanced at the dog. There was something about him, a presence, an intelligence in his eyes that was impossible to ignore. He had just risked his life for a stranger. This wasn't just some lost animal. "I'm sure," the man said. He crouched down, holding out a hand. "Come on, buddy. Let's go." For a moment, the dog hesitated. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. The man gave him a reassuring nod before turning back to the firefighter. "You think Jake's gonna make it?" "They got to him in time," the firefighter said. "But he's got a long road ahead." The man nodded, glancing at the ambulance as its doors closed. He had done his part, but something about this whole thing didn't sit right. Who was Jake Carter? And why had this stray dog, out of all the people, all the cars that passed through this road, chosen to save him? Hours later, the hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Jake lay still, his face pale under the dim fluorescent lights. He was stable, but unconscious. Outside his room, a nurse glanced at the security guard standing by the door. "Why's he got someone watching him?" she asked. The guard shrugged. "Doctor's orders." He came in with signs of head trauma. If he wakes up disoriented, they don't want him trying to leave. The nurse nodded, but there was something in her eyes, curiosity, maybe even concern. It wasn't every day a man was pulled from a burning wreck by a stray dog. It wasn't every day that a story like this unfolded. Meanwhile, across town, the man who had helped Jake sat in his small apartment, watching as the dog curled up on a blanket in the corner. He had given him a bowl of water, but the dog barely touched it. His eyes stayed on the window, as if he was waiting for something. The man leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. He hadn't planned on taking in a stray, but something told him this dog wasn't going anywhere just yet. And deep down, he had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The hospital room remained eerily silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the machines. Jake was still unconscious, his face pale under the dim glow of the medical monitors. The oxygen mask covered his nose and mouth, his chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The room felt sterile, cold, but somewhere beneath all the wires and bandages, life was still holding on. Outside his room, the security guard shifted his weight, glancing down at his watch. It was late, long past visiting hours, but he wasn't just here to keep an eye on Jake for medical reasons. Something about the whole situation had raised questions. A routine accident didn't usually warrant a guard posted outside a patient's door. The nurse who had checked on Jake earlier returned, pausing as she passed the security officer. "Any change?" she asked quietly. The guard shook his head. "Nothing yet. Doctors say he might wake up soon, though." The nurse hesitated. "Did they ever find out what caused the crash?" The guard glanced down the hallway, then back at her. "No official report yet, but word is something doesn't add up." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice. "The accident report says Jake's car veered off the road like he lost control, but the skid marks," he shook his head, "they don't match up with a normal swerve. And then there's the fire. The way it spread so fast, almost too fast." The nurse's face paled slightly. "You think?" "I don't know," the guard admitted, "but something about this doesn't feel right." Meanwhile, across town, the stray dog lay curled up on the floor of the small apartment, his ears twitching in the dim light. The man who had taken him in, David, sat nearby, his mind racing. He had never intended to take in a dog, but there was something different about this one. The dog hadn't eaten much, barely moved from his spot, but every time David glanced over at him, he noticed something strange. The dog wasn't relaxed, not really. He was waiting. David exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "What are you waiting for, buddy?" he muttered. The dog's ears perked up, his eyes flickering toward the door. A chill ran through David's spine. He didn't know why, but something about the way the dog was acting made him uneasy. It was almost as if he knew something that David didn't. And then, the sudden sound of a car pulling up outside. The dog's head snapped up, his body tense. David frowned, pushing himself to his feet and moving toward the window. Peeking through the blinds, he could just make out the shadowy figure of a vehicle idling on the street. The headlights were off. His pulse quickened. Who'll be here this late? The dog let out a low, warning growl, his body shifting as if preparing to move. David swallowed hard, stepping back from the window. Something wasn't right. He could feel it. And at the hospital, just as the clock ticked past midnight, Jake's fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered. The machines beside him beeped a little faster. The security guard straightened, sensing the shift in the air. Then, Jake's eyes snapped open. Wild, confused, terrified. He gasped for air, his body jerking upright, his hands clutching at the sheets. His heart pounded against his ribs. His mind raced, images flashing, fire, heat, the sound of barking, the feeling of something pulling him from the wreckage. The nurse rushed in, her voice calm but urgent. "It's okay. You're safe. You're in the hospital." Jake's head whipped toward her, his breathing ragged. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "The dog." The nurse blinked, confused. "What?" Jake's hands clenched the blankets, his eyes dark with something raw, something real. "Where's the dog?" The nurse hesitated, glancing at the guard. He's safe. Someone took him in." Jake swallowed hard, his pulse still racing. His mind was clouded, but one thing was clear. That dog, he wasn't just some stray. And whatever had happened that night, it wasn't an accident. Somebody had tried to kill him, and they might still be out there. Jake's breath was still unsteady, his heart pounding against his ribs as he sat upright in the hospital bed. His mind raced, trying to piece together everything, the crash, the fire, the dog. He could still feel the heat on his skin, the crushing weight of the wreckage, the helplessness of being trapped. But more than that, he could remember the dog, the way he had fought to save him, the urgency in his eyes, the determination that went beyond instinct. The nurse placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You need to rest. You've been through a lot." Jake shook his head. "No, you don't understand. That dog, he didn't just happen to be there. He saved my life." The security guard stepped closer, his expression serious. "Do you remember what happened before the crash?" Jake pressed his fingers to his temples, trying to focus. It was all a blur, but pieces were coming back. Headlights in his rearview mirror, too close, too fast. The jolt when his car was hit. The sudden, violent spin as he lost control. His throat tightened. "Someone ran me off the road." The nurse and guard exchanged a glance. The guard nodded slowly. "That's what we were starting to think." Jake's hands clenched the hospital blanket. If someone had tried to kill him, then that meant they might still be out there. And they might not be finished. Meanwhile, across town, David remained by the window, watching the shadowy car parked outside. The dog, still tense, didn't take his eyes off the door. The seconds dragged by. The vehicle didn't move. David exhaled slowly. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just being paranoid. But deep down, he knew better. He had seen enough strange things in his life to trust his gut when something didn't feel right. The dog let out another low growl. Then, as if deciding something for himself, he stood up and trotted toward the door. He sat there, watching, waiting. David swallowed hard. All right, buddy, let's see what they want. He moved cautiously, unlocking the door, but keeping it mostly closed as he peeked out. The car was still there, idling in the dark. A chill ran down his spine. And then, the engine revved, the tires screeching against the pavement as the car suddenly peeled away, disappearing into the night. David's heart pounded. Someone had been watching. He looked down at the dog, who was still sitting by the door, unshaken, as if he had expected this all along. You know something I don't you? David muttered. The dog simply blinked. The next morning, Jake was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to take it easy. But resting was the last thing on his mind. The moment he was out, he called David. I need to see the dog, Jake said, his voice firm. David hesitated on the other end. Are you sure you're up for that? You just got out of the hospital. I have to, Jake insisted. Something tells me this isn't over. An hour later, Jake arrived at David's apartment. The moment he stepped inside, the dog's ears perked up. His tail wagged just slightly, but his eyes were sharp, studying Jake as if making sure he was really okay. Jake knelt down, reaching out hesitantly. Hey, buddy. The dog stepped forward, pressing his nose into Jake's palm. A wave of emotion crashed over him. This wasn't just some random stray. This dog had fought for him, saved him. Jake looked up at David. He's special. David nodded. I know. As the two men sat down to talk, the conversation shifted to the crash. Jake explained everything. The feeling of being followed, the way his car was forced off the road. David, in turn, told him about the car that had been watching his place the night before. They were connected. Someone out there wasn't finished with Jake yet. For the next few days, Jake stayed low, keeping a close eye on his surroundings. The dog, who had started calling Shadow, never left his side. He was more than just a companion. He was a protector, a quiet, watchful presence that seemed to sense danger before it even arrived. Then, one evening, as Jake and David sat in the apartment trying to figure out who might have wanted him dead, a realization hit Jake like a punch to the gut. The company he worked for. There had been whispers, something about money, something about fraud. He had never looked too closely, never wanted to get involved. But now, pieces of conversations came rushing back. Warnings. Tension in the office. People suddenly quitting without explanation. Had he stumbled onto something without realizing it? Had someone decided he was a threat? Jake's jaw tightened. I think I know why they tried to kill me. David leaned in. And Jake exhaled. I think I was getting too close to something. Something big. Before David could respond, Shadow let out a sudden bark, his body stiffening. His ears pricked up, his gaze locked on the window. A car had just pulled up outside. Jake's stomach twisted. It's them. David jumped to his feet, his mind racing. We need to go. Now. But before they could move, the apartment door burst open. A figure stood in the doorway, shadowed against the dim hallway light. Jake's breath caught in his throat. And then, before the intruder could take a step, Shadow sprang into action. With a deep, guttural snarl, he lunged, his body a blur of muscle and fur. The man barely had time to react before Shadow was on him, knocking him backward with surprising force. David didn't hesitate. He grabbed the nearest heavy object, a lamp, and swung. The man crumpled to the ground, groaning. Jake staggered back, his chest heaving. He looked down at the man sprawled on the floor, his face half hidden by the shadows. He recognized him, one of his co-workers, someone who had always kept to himself, always seemed just a little too interested in things that weren't his business. Jake's hands clenched into fists. You tried to kill me. The man groaned, barely conscious. David grabbed his phone. I'm calling the cops. By the time the police arrived, the truth had unraveled quickly. Jake's suspicions had been right. The company had been covering up something illegal, and he had unknowingly become a liability. The man on the floor had been sent to finish what the crash hadn't. As the officers led the man away in handcuffs, Jake looked down at Shadow, who sat calmly by his side, tail wagging slightly. "You knew," Jake murmured. "You always knew." David smirked. "Told you he wasn't just some stray." Jake knelt down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, his dark eyes filled with something deep, something unspoken. Jake smiled. "Guess that makes us even, huh?" Shadow licked his hand. The night was still, the danger finally over. But one thing was certain, this dog wasn't just a hero. He was family, and he wasn't going anywhere.